You're listening to a 58 Ember production.
Welcome to Skytalkers. Here are your hosts, Charlotte and Caitlin.
Hello, and welcome to Skytalkers. I'm your host, Charlotte.
Hey, everyone. I'm your other host, Caitlin, and welcome to this week's episode where we are covering another documentary. And this one is called Star Wars: The Legacy Revealed documentary. And this one has been buried deep in the subconscious of Charlotte and I for many, many years. It's been a long time since we've watched it. And I think this was like uncovering a layer of my subconscious of, a little bit of the way that why I am the way I am.
Exactly. The documentary is about myth and the subconscious and the importance of that, and
Yeah.
it covers that, and that's actually what was happening with this documentary for me.
Right.
And I will say, we are not alone. We watch this on YouTube because it's available to watch on YouTube. And all of the comments say the same thing. Like, I watched this in 2007, 2008, and it's such a core part of my memory when I was 11, 12, 13. And thank you for uploading it. Oh my gosh. So if you haven't seen it, you can watch it on YouTube. It's a great one.
Yeah, it really is. The cast of characters, the speakers that they have in this documentary are wild. It came out May 28th, 2007. And what I remember about watching this is you and I watching it one summer when you were house sitting a house a couple doors down, which they had a pool. So it was really just an excuse for us to be at their pool while you were house sitting, and try not to mess up their sound system in their really cool movie room, which is where we watched this documentary.
Yeah. It aired on the History Channel. So it's a History Channel documentary, again, called Star Wars: The Legacy Revealed. It aired in 2007. It was directed by Kevin Burns, who is not Ken Burns, Kevin Burns.
Right, I did that
too. It was directed by the same guy who did Empire of Dreams, and it's the same voiceover. So it has sort of the same feel to me as Empire of Dreams. And I think those two, for me and you, probably were so formative in our Star Wars obsession. And we were watching both of those at the same time. So much so that I would say that this one and Empire of Dreams sort of roll together in my mind a little bit.
Yeah.
I think that's not the case now, but it did back then.
Yeah, I think the thing about this documentary, if you haven't seen it, is it came out in 2007, right? So 2 years after Revenge of the Sith came out. And it really is about all 6 films collectively together, and really kind of takes you not beat per beat, but in some ways beat per beat through the hero's journey and how Star Wars lines up with it. And then also plays a really heavy emphasis on like Greek tragedy and Greek mythology, and the ways that we can see the Star Wars characters represented and inspired by, these figures of Greek myth and in Greek tragic plays and things like that as well. So if you're listening to this and you're like, that sounds like a Skytalkers episode, you'd be correct.
What's so funny to me is I look back on this, and something that I was so starved for after in this era of 2006, 2007, 2008 was people talking about the prequels in a way that was in harmony with the original trilogy. And this documentary was one of the few documentaries that talked about the characters of Anakin and Padme in the same way that they talk about the characters of Luke and Leia. And that was sort of genre breaking. It was seminal. It really was. Yeah. And so much so that so much of what was said in these docs, and we're gonna get into it, the stuff that sticks in our brain, really has informed how we think about Star Wars today. It is actually crazy.
It's funny because the truth is I haven't really thought about this documentary that much since 2007, since 2008. Like, it's come up in our conversations from time to time, but there's like one particular part of it that we'll talk about when we get there. And it's what you and I have always talked about when we've remembered this documentary, but it's one single point that the
And the
documentary
one
made.
single point we're going to get there, we used to laugh about, and now I'm not laughing.
I know,
Now I'm
I
like,
was
true.
I was watching it and I was waiting for them to get to this part because it was kind of the only thing I really remembered. And they get to it and I was like, wow, so true, bestie. What? And
It's literally like, yeah, how could I think that this was funny? This is actually true. Of
yeah,
course it is.
yeah, but then so we haven't really talked about this in the way that we've always talked about, the beginning and, Empire of Dreams. But watching this, I really was astounded at how much is just part of my Star Wars self that probably originated from this documentary, and it hasn't really been a part of our vernacular in the same way as other documentaries when perhaps it should have been all this time.
Mhm. Yeah, I think an interesting note or something to note is that this documentary isn't one that is on a DVD extra. This was for the
Right.
History Channel. It's not included in the box set. It's separate. I wouldn't even go as far to say it's Lucasfilm sanctioned. I think it's Lucasfilm sponsored in any way. Um, it's obviously made in partnership with Lucasfilm for the clips and everything, but it's not. This isn't one that you would find on the DVD extras. It's different.
Yeah,
It's
and
bonus.
it's bonus.
Uh-huh.
There's no one from Lucasfilm in the documentary. George Lucas is not in it. No.
Well, all right. No one from Lucasfilm, but let's go down the list of who's in it. Everyone
Yeah,
hang
there's
tight.
no one from Lucasfilm in it, but listen to who is in it.
Well, J.J. Abrams is in it. So that's the spoiler alert, is that
Yeah,
J.J. Abrams is
but
in it.
that's not
And
even the biggest jump scare of this
no,
documentary.
no. So I'm just going to read the full list of names, and it's academics, it's politicians, it's it's directors. Okay, so it's J.J. Abrams, it's Tom Brokaw, it's Stephen Colbert, it's Joan Breton Connolly, it's Linda Ellerby, it's Newt Gingrich. Was anyone expecting Newt Gingrich to be in this talk? I was not.
No,
I was not.
that was the first thing I texted Charlotte because who else is in it?
Nancy Pelosi is in it. Insane. Also, what is wild to me is that Newt Gingrich is in this documentary about Star Wars. It heavily features the prequels. Newt Gunray is named after Newt Gingrich. He's a villain. So what? Again, this is not Lucasfilm sanctioned. Okay.
That's what really shook me is Newt and Nancy.
Okay, so Peter Jackson is in this. Camille Paglia is in this. We've talked about her a lot on the podcast, so I was really happy to hear her talk about how much she loves the prequels on this. Dan Rather, Kevin Smith, Joss Wheaton, and yeah, a lot of other academics like Dr. Jonathan Young and film critic Elvis Mitchell. So lots and lots and lots of people from all over the place in this documentary.
Yeah, we get a lot of commentary from all of them kind of going in different directions. It's a fascinating documentary. If you haven't watched it, definitely recommend. And this documentary was actually nominated for 3 Emmys. It was nominated in 2007 for Outstanding Writing for Nonfiction Programming, Outstanding Nonfiction Special, and Outstanding Directing for Nonfiction Programming. It didn't win any, but it was nominated for 3 Emmys.
And I will say, this was on TV a lot.
It
A
was.
lot.
Yeah.
It was easy to catch. And I think that the History Channel might have aired this often at the same time that the original Star Wars movies were airing on like Spike, if anyone remembers that. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about what we learned from the documentary and what really stuck out to us. So, Caitlin, where should we start?
I think we should start kind of at the beginning because what this documentary does is, as I said, it kind of goes beat per beat through the hero's journey. But I think if we do start kind of at the overarching hero's journey, it will hopefully lead us into some other directions as we move through the documentary. And they have little title cards, in between each section. So the first section is the hero's journey. And they kind of give this introduction to Joseph Campbell and the hero with a thousand faces, and how George Lucas was heavily influenced by that, obviously. And they start to draw the parallel between Luke and Anakin and the beginning of their journey, and then talk about how Anakin, obviously splinters off. He steps
Mhm.
off of the hero's journey. And this is one of the things that I think we've kind of already mentioned at the top of the show, but we'll continue to bring up throughout this discussion, is that it really was so seminal to have all of these characters and these films presented on equal footing in this documentary, because in 2007, that really was not
Was
happening
not the case.
anywhere. There's one part where they reference a little bit of the critique towards Anakin's character, particularly in Attack of the Clones, but it's really so minor, and it's really to just kind of prove a point that they're talking about. So the point is that the critique that they reference is, Anakin was too whiny in Attack of the Clones. And then I think it was a Kevin that was talking about how, that's quite literally the point. The person who would become the dictator, the evil villain, it would make sense for him to be this whiny teenager who's mad at the world and wants
Mhm.
power to change things. So of course it makes sense that he would be this type of teenager in Attack of the Clones.
Yeah, this type of person. And
Yeah.
yeah, that was the only reference to criticism I thought was people the commenter saying that people might not have liked the whiny persona, but that the whiny persona was actually rooted in myth and why George
Mhm.
Lucas would have chosen that. It's it is purposeful. It's not anything but, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So, like I said, even watching this today, it still felt refreshing to see these clips
Yeah.
from all of these films put next to each other in an intentional way of, they did it here, they did it here, they did it in A New Hope, they did it in The Phantom Menace, and it all makes sense, and it's all very purposeful. And it's just fascinating to watch something like this, because like Clone Wars hasn't even come out yet in any kind of iteration. It's um well, I guess the 2D one had come out at this point, but like the Clone Wars movie with Dave is not out yet. It exists in such a specific time capsule. It's fascinating. One of the things though that I really loved is that it was the specific parallels to Greek mythology, which we've talked a lot about, but I feel like in our conversations, we don't often reference specific characters of Greek mythology as they relate to Star Wars characters. And we talk more about the Greek tragedy as a whole. We haven't really talked about specific characters as much, and this documentary does that a ton. And one of my favorites that they kind of compare Luke to is Hercules and Odysseus. And, this idea, we're starting a little bit at the beginning here of the hero's journey, and how Luke is the hero with a thousand faces, and how his character development is very much like that of Hercules, and having to go through these tasks, these labors, in order to, develop his character, and in order to, go through all of the steps of the hero's journey. And I really hadn't thought about Luke in relation to specifically Hercules, and I really loved that comparison. And this is something they'll continue to kind of do throughout the documentary, and I really liked having that kind of reintroduced into my consciousness.
Mhm. Yeah, the doc did such a good job of weaving in a hero character fighting a monster and how important it is to slay the dragon, slay the monster, and I think that relates to Luke being a Hercules figure. It's just interesting. I totally agree with you. I liked that point of view. I also really liked how they talked about how Luke is quite literally crossing the threshold, and his cantina moment is that you're
Right,
not in
yeah.
Kansas anymore. And I just liked that they show the moment where he walks into the cantina and quite literally crosses the threshold. The droids don't go, he goes. I think as Star Wars fans, especially you and I, Caitlin, like we can work on our podcast for hours each week, right? And we can focus on certain things, and then we go on with our life. And Star Wars is always going to be part of our life, part of our every single day. But it is nice to kind of take a step back and remember and refresh our memory around what Star Wars is reflective of,
Mhm. Yeah.
and just continue to revisit that well. That is so it's sometimes like, especially the hero's journey. I think as a lot of Star Wars fans really will roll their eyes a little bit at it being brought up these days, but when it's really broken down and talked about not just as a path that you go through, but instead how it's reflected in all different types of stories, like you mentioned with Hercules, or even just Dorothy in Wizard of Oz, or Peter Jackson calls Luke the everyman, even relates him to Harry Potter. I mean, I think it's all there. And I think it's important as a Star Wars fan to continue to tap that well, even if it's like, oh my God, not again. Because I feel like
Yeah.
I learned something in this again, even though I
Mhm.
haven't seen this documentary in nearly 2 decades.
Right.
I feel like also another thing that I really liked in this section was this quick reference to how Luke is the naive character, but how, in a way, Luke can be. Luke is like the protagonist in Hamlet, who is Hamlet, and Hamlet's father looms over him in this spiritual, ghostly way. I think it in Hamlet, Hamlet's father drives Hamlet mad, or you can think about it as Hamlet driving himself mad. And so I obviously don't think that happens to Luke. I mean,
Mad with compassion?
well, you can go there if you want to fully into The Last Jedi of I don't think he goes crazy though. Whatever.
No,
But
I don't
you
think
can
so
go
either.
there if you wanted to in terms of analysis. I don't think he does that, but I do think that he is haunted by his father. He's so interested in his father, and then he learns that his father is evil, and then that looms over him throughout the entire 3 films. Or the second and third, really. But I do think that the presence of Luke's father is very much there in A New Hope as well. So I like that comparison.
Yeah, I did too. And I also liked they talked about, the father and son struggle and how it's very mythological. It's very we see it in biblical stories a lot too. And they talked about Zeus and the thunderbolt of Zeus, right? That's Zeus's symbol, and how the lightsaber is like the thunderbolt. And that's again a connection I hadn't really thought about before. And I really loved that. And
Yeah.
they also made the reference of how, Zeus had struggles with his father as well, whose father who had struggles with his own father. And this was like reminding me of so many elements of mythology that I had honestly forgotten. Like Zeus's father is Kronos, who ate all of his children. And that was I'm like, yeah, that's a big struggle. Zeus led all of them out, to escape from his father's stomach. I don't know, it's just funny. And then, the lightsaber as the lightning bolt, and I go, "Oh, that does kind of make sense."
Yeah. And I also just want to note that the documentary does make a couple of lines around whether or not George Lucas was intentional about these type of connections or not, and or if it's just a happy accident or just part of our subconscious, and whether or not that's confirmed or not, like, I don't care. I think it's more part of all these things are part of our subconscious, and that really is what the hero's journey, the hero with 1,000 faces, is all about. That's the 1,000 faces. So
Yeah, and even when they
yeah.
were talking about, they get to a part where they're talking about like the politics and like the culture of today of 2007, and again we have new to Nancy in this uh, documentary, and they're even talking about how a lot of people read a lot of parallels to George Bush and Iraq in the prequel trilogy, and they make a comment of saying that's not an incorrect connection to be making. But I think you also have to think about it in much broader terms, because George Lucas, through, and they go through all these different examples, is looking at patterns in history. And these things are all cyclical. So when you make this connection to like George Bush in the 2000s, it's correct, but it's just another cycle. You can't only think about it as that perspective. It's there, but it's not the only one. And it's not the only one George is calling on for you to think about.
Just since we're here and we're talking a little bit about democracy, there's a whole section in the documentary called The Death of Liberty, and it talks about Palpatine and connects him with Hitler, and talks about dictators and the charisma of power, and how they're always starting out to say that they're going to help the little guy. Part of this section that I thought was really interesting is that it talks about how the pod race in The Phantom Menace has a connection to ancient Rome as like a chariot race, and
Mhm.
how that can be a distraction to the public. And what did you think about that part? Because I was sort of mind blown a little bit around that. Obviously, I understand the chariot race connection, but the distraction to the public, I think that makes total sense based off of a planet like Tatooine that is corrupt and ruled by gangsters and still has slavery, that there is something that distracts everyone from that, and it acknowledges also who's at the top, which is the Hutt
Yeah,
gangsters
Jaffa.
too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree. I was kind of like, I don't think I've ever really thought of the pod race as a distraction to
Uh-huh.
the politics, to the political climate on Tatooine. And in the documentary, they take it into Attack of the Clones too, because we obviously have a gladiator type situation when Obi-Wan, Anakin, and Padme are on Geonosis and they've got all the creatures
Yeah.
coming after them. And it's at that point that Palpatine's plan is really in motion and he's in the process of starting to consolidate his power and everything like that. But everyone is paying attention to this. It's not only that it's a distraction, it's that the entertainment is violent and grisly itself. And it's not like they're at a Broadway play, which is ironic because I know that Anakin and Palpatine do go to like an opera later on in Revenge of the Sith, but here in Attack of the Clones and even a little bit in the Phantom Menace, but really in Attack of the Clones, it's like this violent decadence that everyone is partaking in on Geonosis in this gladiator arena. And again, everyone's looking here and not really paying attention to what's going on at the top level with Palpatine. And the Jedi aren't either.
Yeah, and you can also take it a step further and think about what happens to Rome, the Roman Republic. It falls. And that's
Mhm.
what we're dealing with in Revenge of the Sith too. We're all leading to that. So I don't even know if that's a step further. That's just even part of the text. So,
Yeah.
but I don't know. I just have never really thought of it that way because I think when I think about the pod race, I think about it more as a means to an end to understand how Anakin wins his own freedom,
Yeah. We
not
needed to zoom
necessarily.
out. Yeah.
Yeah, we need to zoom out. This
Yeah.
documentary is forcing me to zoom out.
We're zooming out. We're zooming. Zoom,
Mhm,
zoom, zoom.
mhm.
Yeah, this particular section, The Death of Liberty, had a lot of really good quotes. And it's the section that is really, again, kind of comparing to direct historical events rather than a lot of like mythological ones. They talk about Palpatine and Hitler with the enabling acts, dictators having the charisma of power. And there's this quote where someone says, you really do see this theme that is the government becoming very, very messy, very, very corrupt. And this goes back to the Roman Empire. Free societies, republics do not collapse from without until until they've destroyed themselves from within. The morality necessary to support a free republic has to erode. And they talk about how, the prequel trilogy, there's a big emphasis, obviously, on the prequel trilogy in this time period or in this section. George Lucas showing us that democracy is fragile and it's always destroyed from within. And then this is the quote where they talked about the cyclical nature. They said, Lucas correctly perceives that politics are cyclical and there is never a final solution to anything involving the construction of human society. It's a continual process of construction and self-destruction. And if you listen to our episode where we go through the commentary of Revenge of the Sith, there are actually a lot of quotes from George to this point specifically, which I thought
Mhm.
was a great connection. There's
Yeah.
also in this section is when Newt Gingrich talks about how George Washington would have liked Star Wars and related to it because Washington's people offered for him to become a dictator after the Revolutionary War, and George Washington was like, no. And Newt goes on to say that George Washington would have really liked Star Wars.
This is crazy. This is crazy.
I texted Charlotte that I was watching it ahead of her, and I'm going, listen to what I just heard.
I mean, it's just nuts. I don't even want to give this too much airtime, but like
Right?
it is crazy. It is crazy. Did not
Yeah.
expect this when we set out to do this documentary.
At all.
I cannot get over the fact that Newt Gingrich is in this documentary and he has a character, a villain
Uh-huh.
named after him in the prequel. So then there's this section in which we talk about, yeah, you can make those connections about present day politics, which are there clearly.
Yeah.
And then it's like the man in question is in the documentary in
in the
which we're talking
documentary.
about. It's so funny.
You gotta laugh.
I know, you just have to laugh.
Well, what's fascinating, right, is that Nancy Pelosi is in this as well. She's in it less than Newt. Okay. She's in it like just at the end. Okay. But what is fascinating is that Nancy Pelosi was a big part of why George Lucas got to build on the Presidio. And the Presidio offices opened in 2003, I think, right around there. So just before Revenge of the Sith came out. And then she's in this documentary about Star Wars. So that I could kind of see the connection to, It's just and
Sure.
she
California. Yeah. Okay.
she was at the opening picnic of the Presidio office's opening. It was like this big
Yeah.
picnic, and she was there, uh,
Yeah.
partying at the picnic on the
Got
Presidio.
it.
So
This episode is brought to you with support from Nello. Nello is committed to science-backed wellness with their drink supplements that began in 2021 with the TikTok viral Supercalm. Supercalm combines the clinically studied ingredients of magnesium glycinate, KSM-66 ashwagandha, L-theanine, and vitamin D3 to help lower your cortisol levels and let you feel the calm.
I am a big fan of Nello Super Calm. I've actually been using it since the beginning of the year, and I can absolutely tell a difference in my sleep quality when I incorporate it into my nighttime routine. For me, I've noticed that it helps me relax easier at night and unwind as I get ready for bed. I've even started taking their to go packets with me on trips. I used one on our long flight to Tokyo earlier this year, and it is the reason I got any amount of sleep on that flight.
And she didn't even share any with me.
Yeah, I was limited on my supply.
Thankfully, now I have my own. With over 10 flavors to choose from, there's a flavor for everyone. Use the code SkyTalkers10 for 10% off your order. Okay, let's talk about mentors and wizards. So one of the funniest parts of this documentary to me was Kevin Smith saying he never plays with Obi-Wan as an action figure, but like you have to have him.
You gotta have him.
I liked the fact that he was like, I just never played with him. Like, who cares? And I really did learn, and I didn't know this, and maybe I did know this, but I don't think I knew this, to be honest, that the word mentor is from Odysseus. Like I had no idea, the Iliad. I just had zero idea, and that there's a character whose name is Mentor.
Yeah, I didn't know this either. This was a surprise to me, and I was like, oh, that's where that word comes from. Makes sense. Of course, it came from Greek mythology, but didn't know.
Yeah.
That's the thing about this documentary. So much of it feels familiar, and that's kind of the whole point that they're making is that there's a reason why these things feel familiar, and here's where you've seen it before. So even rewatching this, having not remembered it, it still feels familiar, and the way that they're talking about mentors and wizards and how they, pass on wisdom to the hero, how they can't stay and the journey, it's all things we've heard before, but it was nice to hear it in this new light again. And there are some quotes in it that I just think I want to take with me for the ways that we talk about Star Wars in the future. Like this one, it's such a small quote, talking about how the mentors give a present to the hero, and it's something physical, like Obi-Wan gives the lightsaber to Luke, but it's also about the wisdom that he gains from it too. So they say, quote, "The lightsaber can cut, but so can discernment." And I was like, oh my God, that's such a great quote. They really did something there. The lightsaber can cut, but so can discernment. And we just see that reflected in Luke when he, puts away the tracking to shoot the Death Star, to destroy the Death Star at the end. That's his discernment of when to trust in his gut and to rely on himself in order to do what needs to be done and to be successful at it too. And then there was also a really great quote about the Force in this section too, because, the mentor is teaching the hero about the Force. And the documentary says, quote, "The idea of the Force is general enough that people of any religious background can identify with it. One can see it as a personal god of Western religion, or one can associate it with a more spiritual ideal. I think the key thing to remember is that it means one is believing in something higher, that events in the universe are not meaningless. There is a purpose, there is meaning to life, and something is directing and guiding that." And I think that phrase, "the events in the universe are not meaningless," is really important in our discussion of like the Force and the will of the Force and things like that. And that's definitely a phrase I want to, again, take with us in our future discussions.
Yeah, absolutely. The next section is called Warriors and Damsels, and it talks a little bit about Han Solo as and Obi-Wan as the warrior archetype, and then it talks about how Padme and Leia are the damsel in distress archetype, but then it says that they're not They're not in distress. They are clever and courageous. The documentary, again, this is why it was so seminal, was the first time I heard any sort of mythological understanding of Padme. And I found that really, really important and formative at my young age. The documentary talks about how Nabu, spelled Nabu, was the Babylonian god of wisdom. And so then you think about Padme, who is the queen of Nabu, as wise and embodying wisdom, and how she embodies that planet. And how she also is the nurturing Mother Earth, because the planet that she is from is green and beautiful and lush, and she has high sensibilities, loves deeply, and is fully contrasting sort of the machine nature, which the documentary talks about later, about the theme of man versus machine, which we've talked about so much on the podcast before. But they sort of put forth that Padme is the complete opposite of that, and I agree. I think that's true.
I had no idea about the Babylonian god Nabu.
Me neither.
I was watching
I
this.
mean, I
like, how
did,
do I
but I
not
guess not.
know this? How has this not come up before?
I know.
They also talk about a connection to this pseudo mythological figure. It's kind of unclear if how much she did or didn't actually exist, of Queen Dido of Carthage, who is considered like the founder of Carthage and the national symbol of Tunisia. And I didn't have a lot of time to look into her, but of course my ears prick up because Charlotte and I are going to Tunisia on a Star Wars tour. And there's something in her story where her husband is changing, basically.
Yes.
And there's a scene where she's pleading with her husband to stay as he is. And so they make the connection to Padme obviously pleading with Anakin to, stay with her as he is, to not turn to the dark side, to run away with her. Don't go down the path she can't follow kind of vibe. So I thought that was, again, this is a figure I haven't heard of before. And I am excited to kind of look more into Queen Dido of Carthage.
Yeah, so much of this documentary would say stuff around this where I was like, oh my God, that's so interesting. I need to dive a little deeper because I've never heard that before. And of course, that totally fits. Absolutely.
Yeah.
That she would be someone who is pleading for her husband to stay as he is because he is turning evil.
Yeah.
Duh, that's Padme.
Duh. Peter Jackson talks a little bit about Han Solo too, which is always a fun conversation about, he's solo, he's on his own. And I always love when people make that connection, myself included, of, do you see his last name is Solo? But they talk specifically about how Han is not necessarily from ancient mythology in the ways that other characters are. They talked about Luke and Leia as like Apollo and Artemis, the divine twins coming into the world to restore order. But Han is really from more of the modern and Western storytelling, and he's the cowboy, which is iconic from American imagination because in America we value independence, self-reliance, solo, etc., and how he really kind of fits into that archetype. But it's pretty distinct, they say, when he's not drawing from ancient mythology like so many of our other characters are.
I was wondering something when I was watching this documentary about what you thought about this question. Do you think Star Wars is an individualist story, or do you think it's a collectivist story?
I think it's a collectivist story.
Okay.
I think they talk about this at the end of this documentary.
They do, but not in the way that I was sort of thinking about it. Because I think when we talk about the hero's journey, that's an individualist point of view. We're focusing on one character and how that character changes and grows and brings back the elixir. And the elixir, I think, is for the collective. So I understand that. But I think when we talk about a character like Han Solo, I don't know. I don't know the answer to the question. I would lean more collectivist too, but I could see the argument for the other way too.
I think that's the beauty of Star Wars, is that it is both. It kind of goes back to what we were talking about with the pod race. You have to zoom out. It is about Anakin, and he's the main character and how he gains his freedom in those moments. But when we zoom out and think about it big picture with the politics, the climate of Tatooine and what's going on there, we're seeing a different version of the story almost. And Anakin is just one piece of that. And I think we can take that for all of our characters too. In the same way
Yeah.
that, what we've often talked about in regards to Greek mythology and Star Wars is this idea that the Skywalkers are like the Olympian gods in a lot of ways, which, we talk about Luke and Leia in this documentary as Apollo and Artemis. So those are Olympian gods, but that they are, they're the myth makers. And then everything we've gotten since, you think about shows like Rebels, The Mandalorian, like everything else we've gotten, that's about the society as a whole. And then we have these myths.
Serving the greater good.
Yeah, and then we have these myths of, the Olympian gods. And even the way that Rey talks about those characters in The Force Awakens, it's in that same vein.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's true. One thing that Peter Jackson says in this section that just really stopped me in my tracks was Peter Jackson's talking about Leia and how she's such a great character and how he is agreeing about the Apollo and Artemis. Luke and Leia are Apollo and Artemis, and how they're coming into the world to restore order. I think all that is true. But then Peter Jackson goes and says, and then she turns out to be a Jedi. And I think what he means is her ideals turn out to be Jedi-like, if we think about Jedi as the North Star of it all. But it was so weird.
It was jarring. I was like,
yeah, because I'm like, wait, what?
I don't know. I was like, have you seen The Rise of Skywalker? Because I hadn't at that time.
I know. I'm like, this is 2007. You can't just say that Leia turns out to be a Jedi. That's not what the story says at all.
I also think that at this time, the understanding that there was a correlation between having the Force and being a Jedi.
Sure.
And I think that since then, that idea has changed a lot. So I don't think he would say that now, but I can understand.
Or I guess maybe he's referencing the EU. That could be a thing.
Oh,
that
yeah.
was happening.
I guess so. The way that didn't even.
I'm not going to put it past him. It just hit me because I'm like, what are you talking about, Peter Jackson?
A whole other thing that we don't have that much insight into.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'll accept it then.
Yeah. You can say Peter Jackson.
Yeah. Another thing, just to jump a little bit further ahead, is there's a section where it talks about jesters and monsters, in which C-3PO, R2-D2, and Jar Jar are brought up, and then Jabba the Hutt is brought up. But one of the funnier parts is how people talk about how C-3PO and R2-D2 are sort of the eyes of the audience, and how they are often, they serve beside the action as commenters, and they're similar to a Greek chorus. But something that Stephen Colbert says that's really funny is he says, what would I do in that situation? Freak out, which he does every time in terms of C-3PO.
Right. For him,
yeah, I thought
C-3PO
that was great.
Everyman.
Yeah. And it shows they show a great clip of the Greek chorus. So the Greek chorus on stage in a Greek play are commenting on what's happening on stage. And they're also on stage off to the side. And this is a key part of Greek plays and Greek performances. I've never thought about C-3PO and R2-D2 that way, but it is so true. And they show a clip from Revenge of the Sith when Anakin comes to Padme's apartment and he has already killed all the younglings, and C-3PO runs out and talks to R2-D2, who's still in Anakin's ship. And they're commenting on what's Anakin and Padme are talking about so seriously, but they provide a sort of comedic relief there, but as an observation. And it was so clear to me in that moment that yes, they are the Greek chorus. I don't know about you, but I loved that comparison.
This is one of those things that I think had been buried in my brain for a long time of, they're like the Greek chorus.
Yeah.
And then hearing it but I hadn't actually thought about it in such a long time. And then hearing it brought up again. And again, you see these clips that they play and it's like, oh, obviously.
Yeah.
And they, and they comment, they're verbalizing some of the emotion that's happening, of saying, I don't have a good feeling about that. I have a bad feeling about this, of what's going on. And it does feel so obvious. What I really liked about this discussion of jesters and monsters was Mary Henderson, who is the author of I'm not going to get the title right, but the Myth of Star Wars. I think that's the book. We have it. I loved her commentary in this documentary.
Yeah, so good. Come on the pod.
When Kevin Smith is talking about Jabba, and this is indicative of the 2000s, where he's talking about how Jabba is gross and, he's a monster and all of that. And then he's like, but I have to thank him because that's why I got to see Leia in a gold bikini. It's like, okay, roll my eyes. But then Mary Henderson comes in with this excellent analysis of Jabba, which I was way better, and I was so excited to write down. She talks about
Mm-hmm.
how Jabba is like a dragon in monster stories and things like that. And what do dragons do? They capture maidens and they hoard gold and they hold things hostage. And he is, large like a dragon. And he, obviously is capturing maidens. We see many maidens at Jabba's palace, and he's hoarding wealth and hoarding gold and holding people hostage. And I don't know. I hadn't really thought about this comparison to a specific kind of mythological monster like a dragon and Jabba, and I thought that was such a great comparison.
And all the times that Luke and our heroes have to slay the dragon,
Mhm.
of course, like that's how Return of the Jedi opens, with this triumphant piece of Luke slaying the dragon. And I'm so with you. I was kind of mind blown about that as well. Specifically when they say, "Oh, he hoards gold and takes women hostage." It's like, well, Leia in the gold bikini.
Mhm.
There's no.
Two birds,
That's
one
exactly
stone.
it. Yeah,
Charles is
it's
working
just
smarter, not harder.
it's just it. I think the bikini, so debated, so
Right.
talked about, but it is gold
Yeah.
and it is owned by Jabba, and that can't be more exact.
Yep. A one-to-one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And then also did you mention this, the belly of the beast, like
No,
going
I
into the
like
belly of the
that one.
beast, going into the whale, and how the Sarlacc pit is that, but also could be Jabba in a sense. And I mean, all of that is true. I think also I really liked this, and I don't know if I wrote this down, so I'll just say it here. There was a comparison that I think Mary Henderson also said about how the Death Star is huge and giant and
Mhm.
impenetrable, but when you get to the inside of it, it's hollow, just like its meaning. And I loved that. But even just getting to the belly of the beast, you can
Yeah.
get out. But it's
Yeah.
also a journey to get there.
Yeah, the Death Star comparison, that I think that was Mary Henderson, and that was great. They were talking about that in the machine section because the Death Star looks like a planet. It has a facade like a planet. It's round and big, but it's hollow. So there's nothing nurturing, there's nothing life-giving about it. It's only destruction. And yeah, it's
Hmm.
hollow on the inside, just like its meaning and, it's the intent behind it. That I loved that comparison too and that discussion.
Yeah, in that section, it spends a lot of time talking about and showing real world clips of how the stormtroopers are called the stormtroopers because those were Hitler's henchmen, and how our heroes embrace diversity. And what we're talking about is diversity of species, diversity of uniform, of everything, right? When stormtroopers and the entire empire is one color, couldn't be more drab.
Homogenous.
And how everyone is the same. And so there is there's also a line that talks about how there's no women really seen in the empire either.
Yeah, I thought that section was great. And they specifically call out the diversity and they say, our heroes embrace diversity. It's the resistance of the champions of diversity. And they're not just ethnically various, they're zoologically various against the
Mhm.
enforcers of uniformity. And I thought that was such a great quote. And I was like, hell yeah, let's go.
Mhm. Totally. Yeah, in this section they also say that Joseph Campbell was asking through the power of myth, the moral question of our time is, will we live for the machine or will we live for humanity? The fact that Joseph Campbell thought that the Star Wars films presented that very necessary stark contrast.
Mhm. I think, this really hit hard, thinking about all the conversations with AI right now and the, like, destruction it's doing environmentally and things like that. And, the fact that there's no regulation on it, will we live for a machine or will we live for humanity? And,
Mhm.
environmental justice and what those trade-offs are in everything that we're choosing or not choosing to address right now.
Yeah, I think the documentary was interesting in talking about how in history we are so cautious but needing to accept technology, right? Like
Mhm.
I'm not making a comment about AI, by the way. I'm just saying that that's what the documentary was speaking to, and that how Star Wars was also speaking to that too, about how humanity itself is cautious about it.
Yeah, and JJ actually talks about this when he says
Uh-huh.
it's about because both sides are using technology, right? It's not like the rebellion is void
Right.
of
It's the most
technology.
stark in Return of the Jedi with the
Yeah,
Ewoks. Like
exactly,
that's
but the technology is still there, and part of it is your intent and how you're using it,
100%.
and that is really that's the takeaway because it's there, it's an aid, it's supposed to be helping you, and the rebellion obviously uses it to their aid, but it's that intent because you go from, having droids to help you, whatever, this is a bad comparison, to, like, the Death Star,
Yeah, just the Death Star is the ultimate
yeah,
symbolism here. It's literally called the Death Star. It can't
mhm.
get more obvious that its purpose is violence.
Yeah, yeah, exactly, exactly. Let's talk about the dark side because I know you and I know me, and this was a great section.
This is also, spoiler alert, like this is also the section that we remembered from 2007.
Yeah, but I don't even remember all of it. I just remember one part of it. But, it's talking about the dark side, and remember at the beginning we said that they presented Luke and Anakin as heroes on their hero's journey, and they really spend the first half kind of showing, how Luke progresses through that journey, but obviously Anakin steps off of that path in order to become Darth Vader. And they start this section off by saying Anakin is gripped by power, which is a temptation that Luke is able to avoid. And again, I really loved that framing. And I thought this documentary did a really good job of comparing Anakin and Luke kind of one to one, which I don't think we always do because
Mhm.
I think from a bit of a bird's eye perspective, it's just so obvious to see, dark side father, light side son. But when you do kind of zoom in, which we're doing a lot of zooming in and zooming out here, when you do zoom
So
in,
much zooming in and zooming out.
really pinching, pulling on the screen of Star Wars.
Exactly.
It's really cool actually to go through and kind of compare their steps, their story beats one to one. And I really liked them calling out that power is the temptation that Luke avoids because I think logically we know that, right, from Return of the Jedi that Luke, avoids the temptation of joining the dark side, but I don't think I always put it in terms of the temptation of power, which again feels
Mhm.
obvious, but I don't think we talk about it that way. We talk about it as the temptation of the dark side. He isn't seduced by the dark side, but we don't say seduced by power. And that is a lot of how we talk about Anakin. So I
Mhm.
liked them explicitly stating how Luke avoids the temptation of power.
I totally agree. We do talk about it with Anakin, but not Luke.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's important to talk about with Luke because I think it is the same. It's more
Mhm.
obvious with Anakin, of course, because he is quite literally saying, I need the power to save the one I love, right? It's very much there. But I think that's also there for Luke in Return of the Jedi, too.
Yeah, I totally agree. They also talk about this is the section where they talked about that critique of Anakin being a whiny teenager and how, of course, he should be a whiny teenager. And they make this really good comparison to Achilles at the beginning of the Iliad. And Achilles destroys Troy, Hector of Troy, the Achilles heel. This is from the Iliad myth. But the beginning, the first like half of the poem is all about Achilles being angry. He's angry at Agamemnon, he's angry at the gods, he's angry at Hector of Troy, and they say, quote, "He's angry." This is exactly what Star Wars is dealing with. Fear leads to anger leads to hate, etc. And the first quotes in the Iliad are talking about unbridled anger bringing pain
Mhm.
upon thousands. And again, they make this comparison that that's Anakin. Anakin is just becoming increasingly angry at loss, angry at the things he can't control, angry at his lack of power to change things in his life that he thinks he should be able to change. And this, again, we see this in Greek myth and this like really famous story of Achilles in the Iliad. Super famous. I don't know if you've heard of it.
It goes on to talk about how Anakin was tempted by Palpatine and how Anakin's role of mentor is moved from Obi-Wan to Palpatine, and how Palpatine then is the serpent and Anakin is Eve. And you can have the power of God through the fruit. And that's what Palpatine tells Anakin so that he can have power over life. So this is what really stuck into our mind when we were like 13. We were like, oh my God, I can't believe this documentary thinks about Anakin as Eve.
From Adam and Eve. Why would he be Eve?
How crazy. It doesn't make sense that he's Eve.
He's a boy.
Eve. Like, I don't know.
It's so stupid.
It's so stupid. How could we make fun of that? It's so nuts. But also, I don't know. I don't want to give myself too much credit. I think we laughed about this.
Oh, no, 100%. Again, this was the only thing I remembered when we were, talking about things we wanted to cover on the podcast. We've done a few documentaries this year, and you and I were talking about and going, oh, what about that one we watched way back when? And then the other goes, oh, the one where they said Anakin was Eve. And I go, yeah. But that's literally the only thing I truly remembered from this documentary. And then while I was, again, waiting for this to come up to kind of see how it's actually contextualized in the documentary. And
sorry, you can't really argue any differently.
No, you can't. That's the thing. He says it and I go, yeah, that's so true. And I had never, the pieces we had forgotten that the documentary says Palpatine is the serpent tempting Anakin, who is Eve, because the connection is so clear. But all we remembered was
been more clear.
Anakin is Eve. And I'm going, I don't get that. But again, I'd forgotten all context. But I love this. I think it's, again, the way that they phrase things, I think was so great, of the role of mentor overtaken by Palpatine. Very, very vicious, very dark and sinister, which that is Palpatine. And, the serpent tempts Eve with the power of God. And that's what Palpatine does for Anakin. And it's such a clear connection there. And then they go on, which I highlighted this just for you. They talk about Anakin receiving his baptism as Dark Lord of the Sith, and that they say now his story directly parallels that of the devil himself. And when we look at John Milton's Paradise Lost, we have, the Lucifer, who was God's most beautiful angel, who then is lustful, is greedy for power himself, the power of God. And he starts this war and he loses and is cast out and then has to make his own kingdom in hell. And this is what happens to Anakin as well. And it's all kind of played out visually very clearly on Mustafar as hell.
It couldn't be clearer.
It's very clear. And I wish I had remembered either one of us had remembered the full context of Anakin as Eve.
Yeah, I think Anakin as Lucifer also makes a ton of sense to me. We've talked about that before. This is not new. I love Paradise Lost, so this is not new, but I loved the way that this documentary positioned this and really made it so obvious. And just the concept of Lucifer in Paradise Lost building a kingdom that is is his own type of heaven, but it's hell. It is his own kingdom. It's a parallel universe to good. It is pure evil, right?
Yeah.
So, and I think that's what you can say the Empire is. That mythologically, I think that's what's happening.
Yeah, definitely. The other thing that I like the way that they describe things is they talk about, when Anakin loses his limbs, the price of evil becomes physical, as we see in Anakin's character being trapped within, the Vader suit. And they talk about Anakin as an extremely passionate character, and that part of his hell is now to become something mechanical that is devoid of passion when he lived his life so passionately. And then even the place where it becomes his hell is passionate, as like Mustafar is a passionate sequence, and it is all, lost from him, and he can no longer be passionate himself. I've said that word too many times. I'm sorry, but
it just becomes unfeeling.
Yeah.
I think I've twisted myself sometimes into a pretzel around how obvious Star Wars can be around, we've talked about it already in this podcast, but man versus machine, and like how machine, you remove a sense of humanity, and Star Wars is really obvious on it. I don't think it's commenting on any sort of like real world anything. I really just don't. And I think that maybe the newer stories are doing that, but when we're talking about Darth Vader, presenting it this way in this documentary as Anakin as someone who is so passionate, being unable to feel that passion because it's fully removed from his actual corporal form, was so literal, and I just really appreciated that because I think that is so true. And I love the concept of Mustafar even being a passionate place, but it's sort of, you can't feel it. It's unfeeling.
Yeah.
When that is sort of your birthplace as Darth Vader.
Well, that hell is all consuming, which is
Yes.
all feeling to the point where you are then devoid of feeling, which is
Yeah.
what happens to Anakin.
And it's also, you can take it even a step further to present day Star Wars, which shows Darth Vader's castle being in Mustafar and this connection that Vader is trying to feel towards, I think, his passion itself. And it's not there because he's still consumed by evil, but he is living in this hellscape. It's like fiery and burning, and it's just fully negative.
Yeah. Baptized through fire.
Fully.
Okay, so we have his damnation, but then we have his redemption and resurrection. And that brings us back to Luke and Return of the Jedi, right? And I, again, just really liked how they talked about Luke's choice in the end. And I never really thought in these types of terms about Luke saving saving Vader, saving Anakin. They talk about how, he has a choice to make basically about he finds out this truth about his father in Empire Strikes Back, and then he has a choice about what he's going to do about it, about this knowledge that he has. He can either take Palpatine and Vader's choice of joining the dark side, or he can take Yoda and Obi-Wan's choice of killing Vader, rejecting his attachment to his father. But then Luke, chooses the secret third thing, which is to redeem him. And again, the idea of having these choices about what path he could take was a really good framing of what happens in Return of the Jedi. And they talk about how Luke saves everything through his attachment to his father. And I think that's another really good phrase to take into one day when we do a character analysis focus on
Luke Skywalker
himself, of saving everything through his attachment to his father. And that is a very Christian kind of redemptive moment in the film, quote. And they talk about how you can see Luke as kind of a messianic character in that vein, which makes sense because he's able to bring salvation to his father at the end.
I think in a lot of ways, the sequel trilogy deals with Luke as a Messiah figure, which is fascinating given the fact that this, I don't know, I think that makes sense as Luke did the ultimate thing. What I really love, I love the concept of, in the documentary, just outright saying this, Luke saves everything through his attachment to his father.
Yeah.
I think that's perfect, the through his attachment, because we can sit here on the podcast and constantly debate the Jedi's version of attachment, obsession versus empathy versus love, all these things that what makes you a solid hero? How are we thinking about the Jedi? How are we thinking about the Jedi as a mythic figure? How are we thinking about Luke Skywalker? And what's the future of the Jedi as we move forward in the timeline? Like, we talk about this all the time, but this to me reinforces what I just know to be true, which is the only reason why Luke is able to save his father is because he loves his father. And so you can say that it's and the fact that Anakin loves Luke too, right?
Yeah.
And you can say, you can call that an attachment, sure. Star Wars certainly does. And that's exactly what happens. He does save his father because of his attachment.
Yeah, he really does. The last section that they really talk about here with Vader and Luke is they again make this comparison now not to Achilles, but to Hector, who Achilles killed Hector at the Iliad. But it's at the very beginning of the play when Hector is saying goodbye to his son, who's a baby, and he has his war helmet on, and the baby is scared. And so then Hector takes off the helmet and kisses his son goodbye. And I think you can again draw that parallel to Vader taking off his helmet for his son to like really see him. But then, in the myth, Hector tells his baby, one day they'll say you're just like me. No, one day they'll say you're greater than your father. And I think that we see that with Anakin and Luke too, that Anakin was this incredible hero in the prequel trilogy throughout the Clone Wars, and then he became he became something else. And Luke was able to resist the temptation of power and to save everything through love, through his attachment, and was better, greater than his father in that sense, right? And I really liked that comparison too. They also talk about the burning away, and this again feels like one of those very obvious comparisons that I don't think we've talked enough about ourselves. Of, at the end of Revenge of the Sith, Anakin's humanity is burned away, the baptism through fire, and then that fire is mirrored at the end of Return of the Jedi, and all that
Mhm.
machinery and all of that man is burned away. The story is complete of Anakin. But they also mention that burial on a pyre is burial of a hero in so many different cultures and myths, which is true. So there's this dichotomy going on of the role of fire in Anakin's life, of, from Revenge of the Sith to Return of the Jedi, of him being defined, his identity as villain, as hero, as man, as Jedi, as father, and how it's all kind of represented in those moments in Revenge of the Sith and then Return of the Jedi. That was great.
Yeah, I think George Lucas really did something by adding to the concept of a hero gets a funeral pyre,
Mhm.
by making Qui-Gon's funeral when he
Right.
made The Phantom Menace.
Yeah.
And I think I think it's really a great move that it was added that's how Jedi are
Buried.
given,
Yeah.
buried. They're saying goodbye to their corporal form, right? Like, that makes sense to me. And I
Mhm.
think adding that really proves, even though I think the subtext is very obvious in Return of the Jedi, but when you watch The Phantom Menace, when in release order, I suppose, you're like, wow, this is for a hero. This man
Yeah.
died tragically, and everyone is here mourning him,
Mhm.
right? And so it adds a little bit more to Darth Vader. And I think that when you see the saga as a whole, I totally agree with you that it is fire. It's a fire beginning of Vader and the fire burning away, but then it's also this double meaning of heroic send off too,
Mhm.
and made even more sort of poignant by the fact that it's only Luke there to witness, the only person that
That did
really
love him. Yeah.
that
That's
did
still
love
there.
him. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. One thing I was surprised they didn't talk about was that it was Hayden Christensen at the end. I was kind of sure that they would address, him coming back as the ghost, that he was redeemed by the Force, by this,
Hmm.
larger thing, the Force around us, and the symbolism of him coming back as, Hayden Christensen, young
Hmm.
Anakin, pre Darth Vader Anakin, but they didn't. They didn't really touch. I think that's what's fascinating is they didn't really touch on, special editions, DVDs, like nothing
That's not what this
technical.
documentary is for.
It's not,
I agree with you that this would have been the place to do it, but
yeah,
even for the documentary that really synthesizes the original trilogy and the prequels as much as this one does, I feel like that was
a
that
step
would
too
be
far for them
a
at that
step too
time.
far potentially. Yeah, at this time. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. But I was waiting for it, and I was like, if there was ever a place to talk about it in, because at the time it was pretty negative, this
Hmm.
switch in Return of the Jedi. I was like, this is the place to do it. And they didn't do it. They avoided it, which I can respect, I suppose.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah. At the end, they kind of go through all of these, parting shots, final quotes, really, from all of these people we've had in the documentary. This is where Nancy Pelosi jumps in, and she talks about how George Lucas's stories always, emphasize that the power is always with the people.
Okay.
I know. And then my favorite, though, was from Mary Henderson and Peter Jackson. Mary Henderson's quote was, quote, "I think the legacy of Star Wars is that it helps open our hearts to the dimension of the mystery of our lives and also gives us some guidance in conducting our own hero's journey." And then I really liked how Peter Jackson gives. I don't have the full quote, but he really focuses on the sheer brilliance of the imagination of Star Wars and how many directions it goes. And he doesn't say the word sandbox, but he's kind of talking about the sandbox of Star Wars and how vast it is, and that is really what draws people into it.
Hmm. There's something I love, and I love when people wax poetic about the legacy of Star Wars.
Me too, man. Me too.
It really gets me every time, and I'm like, damn, true. Every time.
So good.
Yeah, and no matter how many times I hear it, I'm like, yeah, that is so true.
Mhm. It is really so true. I'm so glad we rewatched this. I am ready to rewatch it again next time I
Me
need
too. Me
honestly,
too.
like, some inspiration and just, "Oh, yeah. Let me think about this some more. Let me, expand on this point they made." It was so good.
Or just as a reference point, honestly, I think it's really nice. And I think
Mhm.
that these are pieces that we touch on throughout various discussions. Like even when you were talking about the mask, and I should have jumped in and said this, but I'm just gonna say it now. The concept of Hector taking off his mask and revealing himself to
Mhm.
his son, right? Is that what it is?
Yeah.
That's the Mandalorian and Grogu.
It is. Very much is.
And the removal of a mask is so Star Wars and has become more in like explored in all these different facets, of course, throughout all of the new Star Wars that we've had. But hearing that, I'm like, that is so explicitly the Mandalorian. So
Mhm.
once again, I'm excited to refer to this as like a new Bible, I guess, for mythological Star Wars, because the way that it's broken down, I can't recommend it enough. And I'm sure if you listen to this, you can definitely listen to this without watching the documentary. But I highly recommend watching the documentary. It's on YouTube. I'll link it. It's here.
Yeah, it's kind of surprising because to think about this that was made, almost 20 years ago, at this point, I think you would kind of expect it to feel a little dated, and it doesn't because the topic
Mm-hmm.
itself is about how familiar and everlasting these types of stories are. And I think I almost expected that going in to have very different opinions about how they talk about these characters, just knowing that some of these characters have much different stories now. You think about like Luke Skywalker is a big example here of, where his story goes in the sequel trilogy, but nothing is contradicted in the inspiration and the way that they talk about his character development through this. And I was a little bit surprised, honestly, at how the only thing that I noted of I don't know if I really agree with that interpretation was talking about Leia as a Jedi, and that was such a minor thing. Like that was really just about Force to Jedi correlation, you know what I mean? And how that's not exactly accurate anymore. But yeah, I think it's really good, and you should definitely watch it. Again, a lot of jump scares at some of these speakers, but overall,
It's all over the place, man.
you've been warned, so you know
Yeah.
it's coming. But
Yeah,
just
exactly.
take those with a grain of salt. A few
Yeah.
grains.
Mm-hmm.
Well, is there anything else we want to talk about with Star Wars: The Legacy Revealed?
I don't think so, but I have to say, I am loving returning to these documentaries I saw
Yeah.
once and then I'm still thinking about.
Yeah, and kind of thinking about one
Yeah.
particular part and nothing else.
The one particular part that's like so true.
So true. So true.
Such an astute observation that
Our minds weren't ready to accept it yet. We were young and dumb. Yeah, me too, though. I've really been enjoying going through these documentaries, and we have a few more planned for this year, so be on the lookout for that. But thank you guys so much for listening. We really appreciate it. We would love to know if you've ever seen this documentary. Was there something particular that was lodged in your subconscious about it, like Anakin as Eve was for us, and nothing else? We would love to know. Please let us know on Twitter or X at SkyTalkersPod, or our personal handles. Mine is at Caitlin Plusher and Charlotte's is at Clarity. We also have our website, skytalkers.com, our Instagram, our TikTok. Those are all great places to find us. And if you have a couple seconds to leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, we would so appreciate it, as it helps other people find our show. And if you're interested in other ways to support us, you can head on over to our Patreon and check out our reward tiers there.
I want to say a huge thank you to these patrons: Bailey, Sam, Emma, Swara, Sophie, Shelby, Catherine, Tom, Sarah, David, Ella, Kels, Joanna, Jennifer, Savannah, Kyle, Jacqueline, Neil, Blessed Cheesemaker, Allie, and Megan. Thank you so much for supporting us.
Yes, thank you guys so much. And until next time, may the Force be with you.
May the Force be with you.
This has been a 58 Ember production. For more shows, please visit the 58 Ember channel, 58ember.com, or find us at 58 Ember Media on socials.